Welcome to episode 152 of This Week in Linux, your weekly source for Linux GNews. From the Destination Linux Network, I'm Michael Tennell. If you're new to the show, this is the podcast that will keep you up to date with what's going on in the Linux world, and I'll give you my take as a 20-year plus Linux user. Coming up on this week's episode, we've got a ton of big news. We've got distro news from Red Hat for RHEL 8.4. SUSE made a lot of announcements at SUSECON. We've also got a new release from GeckoLinux that made some interesting changes that we're going to talk about. And also in app news, we're going to check out the latest releases of the popular editor Sublime Text and Element's new feature called Spaces. And I'm quite excited for the Spaces. It's a big difference from the previous version. Then we'll check out the hardware space, where there is some new laptops from Entroware and Tuxedo Computers to check out. Plus, we got a really cool hardware topic related to space and satellites, so stick around for that. And later in the show, we've got a topic to cover that has quite a bit of drama attached to it, and that's the news regarding the situation around the Freenode IRC network. So all that and so much more coming up right now on TWIL, your weekly source for Linux GNews. Up first in the show this week, we have some distro news to talk about. And first up in that, we're going to talk about RHEL, or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.4 being released. RHEL 8.4 brings important features like edge deployments, hybrid cloud, and enhancements for operators and developers and organizations that are standardized on RHEL. And to quote from their announcement page, with RHEL 8.3, we announced a deployment option for RHEL to help solve challenges common to edge computing environments. And with 8.4, we have built on top of that work to improve the user experience around edge computing capabilities in RHEL. RHEL 8.4 simplifies updates and provides additional options for installing to disconnected systems. And to be clear, a lot of edge systems are pretty much disconnected because that's kind of the purpose of them. And it adds the ability to use the OS tree repositories with OCI container images. Now, to break down like some more specific things that are happening in this latest release, RHEL 8.4 features Intel Tiger Lake graphics support. They have expanded the support for the capabilities of the eBPF kernel. There's also some improvements to the namespace, the time namespace, and other kernel features backported, various package updates, Python 3.9 availability, and many, many more things for this enterprise Linux operating system. Another thing I wanted to talk about was really interesting is the images for real time. So this is basically users can now use the real-time kernel in their edge images. And speaking of edge computing in general, I am really, really interested in seeing this cool project that is being made by IBM that was announced at the Red Hat Summit. And this is called MAS 400 or MAS 400, or what that stands for is Mayflower Autonomous Ship, a fully autonomous AI-powered marine research vessel. So it's equipped with 6 AI-powered cameras, 30 onboard sensors, and 15 edge devices, with a grand total of 0 humans on board. So this is really interesting because the MAS provides a flexible, cost-effective, and safe option for gathering critical data about the ocean because no humans are there because it's doing AI-based systems. They say that it can spend long durations at sea carrying scientific equipment and making its own decisions about how to optimize its route and mission. Plus, once it is launched, anyone will be able to track the progress and location of the MAS 400 on their website on a map, which is really cool. This is supposed to be happening sometime around June, and I can't wait to see what happens with this because this is a very interesting use case of edge computing because, one of the things that we know the littlest about in terms of science is the ocean. We know a lot about it, but it's so vast, we don't know that much. So having something like this where it can spend, so much more time just doing research and that sort of thing because it's unmanned is very, very interesting to see. So I'm looking forward to seeing like the information that comes from this kind of research. If you'd like to learn more about, the Mayflower Autonomous Ship, I'll have a link in the show notes for that, as well as a link to Red Hat's RHEL 8.4 release notes. Up next in the show, we have a lot of interesting news from SUSE. There's the SUSE IPO, which is big news, plus also SUSECON happened recently, and there's also a lot of stuff that was announced at SUSECON that I want to talk about, and we're going to jam it all together into a single topic, which I'm going to call the SUSE sub-sandwich. just something like that. Anyway, this is really interesting because the Swedish private equity firm EQT that purchased SUSE in 2018 has gone through the process of doing an IPO for SUSE. Now, they originally were wanting a 34 euro per share IPO, but instead SUSE shares opened at 29.50 euros per share, and also eventually settled by the close of business on May 20th at 30 euros or 30.39 cents euros. I don't know. Is it cents for euros? I don't know. Some have called this a disappointment for SUSE and EQT, which I think is interesting because it is worth noting that this gave it a market cap of around 5 billion euros or approximately 6.1 billion USD. And it might not be what they hoped for, but it wasn't a failure by any stretch. And SUSE and its backers sold 37.8 million shares in the IPO for 1.1 billion euros. And EQT will still remain the company's largest shareholder with a stake of 77.6%, which is definitely interesting because, and with just taking a company that you purchased from a couple of years ago to making this huge play and turning it to a public company is a really interesting business decision, and they seemingly made money off of this, so it does seem like a good deal. Plus, SUSE itself continues to do well with reported revenue of over $500 million for the 2020 financial year, and also the acquisition of Rancher Labs is a major Kubernetes move, as well as in addition to like the containers and cloud move and that sort of stuff. It's really, really interesting play, as well as a bunch of other stuff they're doing that we'll get to in a second. But it's kind of interesting because of how SUSE's history has changed over the years. Because people have been worried about SUSE for, because they were purchased so many times over the years that, people were worried when EQT purchased them again. But based on the track record of what has happened since that purchasing, SUSE has just constantly been improving, and just it's been fantastic for it, especially with this new public version of the company. So for those who don't know, SUSE has changed ownership over the years multiple times. Like SUSE was acquired by Novell in 2004. Attachmate bought Novell in 2010, and then in 2014, Micro Focus purchased Attachmate, and then they decided to spin off SUSE into an independent division, which that division was purchased by EQT in 2018. And it's kind of like a complicated history. I might be going into more details about like the history of SUSE because it is really interesting because SUSE started as a base layer on top of Slackware, which is pretty interesting overall. But that's another topic for another day. But this is really cool because this whole separation into a public company gives a lot more room for SUSE to grow, and they have been growing significantly over the past couple of years already, and there's just so much more that it can do, especially with this new change of their approach to the enterprise distribution as well as the OpenSUSE Leap distribution, because SLE, or SUSE Linux Enterprise 15 SP3 or 15.3 specifically, will have binary compatibility with OpenSUSE Leap, as also the server edition, naturally, of SLES. But the OpenSUSE Leap part with SLE is really interesting because, for example, there was some, hubbub, you could call it, for Red Hat in December of last year when they announced the ending of CentOS Linux as a distro and putting more focus on CentOS Stream. And this is to make it more I think that it's actually a good thing for everybody on that thing. I might make a video on that as well. But I think it's really cool because this change that SUSE is doing is not at all in reaction to what Red Hat did, because they've been doing this for a couple of years, and that would be kind of impossible for them to react within 6 months so drastically. But it's kind of a funny coincidence because that's really what it is. It is a coincidence. But because Red Hat decided to put more focus on making RHEL available for more people rather than using a CentOS, endpoint for people to get into. Because CentOS was, at the time, CentOS Linux had some interesting structures of the fact that people thought that it was like a downstream to Red Hat and also an upstream sort of for the community to participate, but that's not how it really worked. So there was times where you'd have to wait months to get updates because it didn't really even have a point release system. It just kind of pulled in from Red Hat, which is, not the smoothest thing. But the way that SUSE is doing it with OpenSUSE Leap is very, very interesting. So the structure is starting with Tumbleweed, where they have a bleeding edge rolling distribution that does all the testing and all the craziness of what bleeding edge typically does. And then they kind of take a snapshot of Tumbleweed and create SLE from it. So you have SUSE Linux Enterprise based on a period of time where they snapshotted Tumbleweed. And then at that point, they take SLE and put that into OpenSUSE Leap, and then do some extra community stuff on top of it. So essentially, OpenSUSE Leap is a downstream of SLE, and Tumbleweed is an upstream to all of it. So it's a really cool structure that I realizing I need to make a video about again. So there's a lot of videos apparently that I need to do from this particular topic. Because this is just really cool. So this move that SUSE did in IPO, the change between having the OpenSUSE Leap and SUSE Linux Enterprise being separate, but are now combined into a much smoother transition period of OpenSUSE is the starting point, then it goes into SUSE, and then it goes back to OpenSUSE. It's a very, very interesting structure that I guarantee I will make a video about to clarify, because I don't know if I explained it as well as I could normally with doing a video structure. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about this particular topic, as well as the other topics in the SUSE sub-sandwich, I'll have links in the show notes below. Speaking of SUSE, let's talk about a derivative of OpenSUSE, and that is GeckoLinux. So GeckoLinux 999.210517.0 was released. Rolls right off the tongue. Actually, the way that the version system is made, it does make sense once you look at it after for a while. But the 999 part is just to referring to the rolling release based on OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and that one's always 999 dot something. And then the other part is just the date, so 2021 May 17th. So that's where it comes from. And the .0 is just like for point releases based on when they needed to do updates and that sort of stuff. So it's a really interesting versioning scheme. I've not seen that very often, or if ever, but it's still interesting. They also do something similar with the GeckoLinux static, which is based on OpenSUSE Leap. So with OpenSUSE Leap 15.2, you have GeckoLinux 152 point whatever date and that sort of stuff. So anyway, this next release of GeckoLinux 999.210517.0 has a lot of changes in it that have, like, for example, the default file system has now been changed to Btrfs, which makes sense because, and it was actually kind of interesting that it wasn't Btrfs before, since OpenSUSE and SUSE are so heavily involved in the development of Btrfs. So of course they use it. So it was interesting for them, for GeckoLinux to not have it, but that is now the default file system for the various guided installation options in the Calamares installer. And it also comes with transparent Z standard data compression. It also has enabled out of the box ZRAM swap. And the early daemon, I'm not sure if it's early or early OOM. I want it to be early so I'm going to go with that, is also enabled by default to help prevent unrecoverable system freezes in low memory situations. So GeckoLinux has 3 different versions. They have the static and rolling that I've already talked about, and they also have the GeckoLinux Next, which is it's kind of like rolling but not rolling. So it is based on the OpenSUSE Leap release, but it has newer stuff, like different components are bleeding edge rather than having the whole thing like Tumbleweed would. And what makes GeckoLinux different from other OpenSUSE-based distributions is that it uses the Calamares installer. It has support for proprietary media formats and various media apps, thanks to Pacman repository out of the box and some other stuff. There's also multiple different editions you can check out if you want. So that, like, the latest rolling release introduces GNOME 40 support, Plasma 5.21.5, LXQt 0.17, Budgie 10.5.3, and many, many more. So if you want to check out a derivative of OpenSUSE, you can check out GeckoLinux well, 999.210517.0. Right. Links in the show notes. This episode of This Week in Linux is brought to you by DigitalOcean and their app platform. DigitalOcean's app platform service is a solution to build modern cloud-native apps. And what does that mean? Well, it helps you rapidly build, deploy, manage, and scale your apps with high scalability, zero infrastructure management, which means that you simply just point your GitHub or GitLab repository to the app platform and it will do all the heavy lifting for you. For example, it handles the infrastructure like app runtimes and dependencies, so you can push code to production in just a few clicks. It also secures your apps automatically by creating, managing, and renewing your SSL certificates, and also protecting your apps from DDoS attacks. It has support for multiple programming languages like Node.js, Python, Go, PHP, Ruby. It also has support for Docker, static sites, and container images. You can run code on the app platform with little to no customization because it uses cloud-native open standards and automatically analyzes your code, creates containers, and runs them on Kubernetes clusters. As a listener of the This Week in Linux podcast and a member of the DLN community, you can get started for free. Actually, better than free, because DigitalOcean is giving you a $100 free credit when you go to do.co/DLN. Again, go to do.co/DLN to get a $100 free credit on DigitalOcean's app platform. And we want to thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of This Week in Linux. Up next in the show, we have some interesting news to talk about, and you could even call it drama-related news that relates to the Freenode IRC network. So if you're not familiar, IRC is Internet Relay Chat. It is a very old style of communication that is very popular when it comes to open source software projects and like how they do development discussions, user support, and many other things. And Freenode is an IRC network that has been around for more than 2 decades, and it's very popular in various open source software projects and that sort of stuff. And it has been so for a very long time. Now, due to a situation that some are calling a hostile takeover, not me, some are calling that, most, if not all of the volunteer staff are leaving the network. And some projects are looking to move to alternative chat platforms. Some are considering other IRC networks, and others are considering just adopting Matrix/Element as the main platforms. And now this is a developing story, so I will not be providing my own opinion on this until further info is known. So this is more about letting you know what is happening at the situation, and you can choose for yourself your opinion. I'll provide links in the show notes for a lot of details related to this topic. There will be a lot of links if you would like to dig in deeper. Once we know more about what is going on, then we can discuss it more in depth then. But for now, here is the gist of it. So I'll give you one side of the story and then follow that up with another side. So we're going to talk about the libera.chat side and then the Freenode side. So Klein is a former staff at Freenode, said that some time ago, Crystal, the former head of Freenode staff, sold Freenode Limited, a holding company, to a third party named Andrew Lee, under terms that were not disclosed to the staff body. It turns out that this contract did indeed intend to sell the entire network and its holdings, a fact hidden from the staff. Mr. Lee at the time had promised to never exercise any operational control over Freenode. Now, the reminder, this is a quote from Klein, not my opinion. Also continuing on, Klein says that in the past few weeks, we began to realize that this has changed, and Mr. Lee has sought to assert total legal control over the network, including user data. Despite our best efforts, the legal advice the Freenode staff has obtained is that the contract signed by the previous head of staff cannot be fought with a reasonable likelihood of success. Now, this is actually continues on with more, but I wanted to kind of break it from here and switch to the response that Andrew Lee provided in response to the situation. So Andrew Lee is the owner of Freenode Limited and also the founder of the VPN service Private Internet Access and London Trust Media, which was the owner of Private Internet Access. I don't know how much Andrew Lee is involved right now with either of those, though, since the sale of Private Internet Access to Cape Technologies and that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure if he is involved in it anymore, but he was the founder of it. So there you go. So Andrew Lee responded with this, and I quote, there's going to be a lot of paragraphs of quotes here, so, stick with me. Since 2013, I have been a major sponsor of Freenode, providing servers and funding through one of my companies. I have no intention to stop this in the future. The rumors of a hostile takeover are simply untrue. I've been the guardian and owner of Freenode since 2017 when Crystal, the former owner, approached me and asked if I was interested in purchasing it, as we had in previous years discussed this. So Andrew continues on with saying, in April of this year, after Crystal had resigned, I was approached by new head of staff, Tamal, I don't know the pronunciation, but it's Tomaw, who asked if we could have ownership over the domains. I responded with my wish to decentralize the network. Subsequently, I learned that I was locked out of the account after a few days later. When I asked for access back, I was denied, and suddenly a story that I was attempting a hostile takeover began to spread. And Andrew continues with, at this point, I became worried about the safety of Freenode. It was odd that Freenode Limited, represented by me, was locked out of Freenode's accounts when I used to have access the whole time. After subsequent attempts to get access back, I resorted to reaching out through an attorney. Finally, Tamal voluntarily handed back all of the access to Freenode Limited. So he says that this is good news, as Freenode will continue to run as it had with the support it has always had. Furthermore, Tamal and I have engaged in civil discussion, as we are both in agreement as it relates to wishing for Freenode to continue to what it has been. I am optimistic these discussions will end with a positive result for the community, which is the most important participant here. Now, this is interesting because there's a lot of drama here. There's one side saying it's a hostile takeover, the other side saying this is not at all that, and there's kind of some, muddy waters related to who did the takeover in terms of talking about the access and that sort of stuff. Now, again, not providing an opinion here because I need to spend a lot more time researching this topic than was available to me this week. So in the future, I may talk about it in more details when we get more information about it and that kind of thing, in a future episode. But there have been people talking about some interesting stuff related to like the sponsorship and logos, and this was also addressed by Freenode or by Andrew Lee on this. And it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of people talking about how the logos that were being placed for one of his companies, Shells.com, was somehow in violation to the thing. But the logo for Private Internet Access has been on the Freenode website for years, so it's kind of weird that would be a factor. I don't know if that's really a factor or not. There's some people saying it is and some people saying it's not, so, whatever. But anyway, a lot of the Freenode staff decided to resign, and they decided to create their own server or IRC network as an alternative, carrying the same ethos that they had at Freenode. So it's kind of interesting how they're doing it. It's called libera.chat, libera.chat. And many projects have announced the intent to move off of Freenode, while a number of other projects are still considering, continue to discuss the possible move on their respective mailing lists, like Qt and Ubuntu and Fedora, and those things are still discussing whether or not they should, and that sort of stuff. It's a really interesting situation, and it's very fresh in terms of this. There's a lot of stuff that can change. As I said, it's a developing story. This stuff can change, at any given time. There's a lot of different pieces to figure out this puzzle. And some of the projects departing Freenode are moving to libera.chat, like I mentioned, while others are moving to OFTC and other platforms. If you're not familiar, OFTC is the Open and Free Technology Community, which is a member project of the SPI, or Software in the Public Interest, which is a nonprofit organization which was founded to help organizations develop and distribute open hardware and open software. And aside from this IRC network shakeup, it's kind of interesting because over the past few years, there's been a growing number of projects that have looking to move away from IRC as a whole, or at least as a primary. For example, like going to Matrix or Element, and even some doing Discourse or other forum type software to, push their stuff from a real-time chat thing to a Discourse forum or some other kind of forum, and also other communication alternatives, like not necessarily Slack, although some do use Slack, but it's more like the alternatives to Slack and that kind of thing. It's really interesting, and this is a pretty hostile topic. So again, as a developing story, I will keep you updated on what's going on when we know more. But in the meantime, if you would like to check out the links for yourself to see all the different opinions from the former staff as well as from Freenode and that sort of stuff. I'll have links, a lot of links, in the show notes below. Speaking of alternatives to IRC, we're going to talk about Element Spaces, which is a new feature for the Matrix chat client Element. And this is a very welcomed feature, much anticipated feature because it's been on the roadmap for quite a while. And this allows you to essentially better organize your chats and rooms inside of Element. So for a little while, they had this community feature. And it had some limitations and it had some issues, and some people would, have to create multiple rooms and invite people to those rooms, or create in a community and invite people to those communities, and it is just kind of a mess. But this is a much anticipated update for a lot of people, including myself. I was in the group of people who were not really a fan of the community feature. And Spaces, while still in beta, just to be clear, still in beta, is a big difference. So the difference between the two is also a thing that I have been wanting, and that's the ability to better organize my different sections inside of Element. So let's talk about spaces in general. What are spaces? Spaces are a way to group rooms and people together or whatever in various different structures. So there's 3 different types of spaces. There's the public spaces, private spaces, and the personal spaces. Now, public spaces are optimized for communities, essentially shared and discovered using links anywhere you'd want to share it. So like the DLN community or the Destination Linux Network has a community on Matrix. So you can check out the Destination Linux Network Matrix room. I'll have links in the show notes if you want to check it out, but it's destinationlinux.network/community. You can find all sorts of links there for Matrix as well as other platforms if you want to as well. So if you want to join the Matrix community on DLN or the DLN community on Matrix, whatever, then find links in the show notes for that. There's also private spaces, which is really interesting because this is a way to optimize for private teams like companies and that sort of stuff to have invite-only access and also make it easier for people to explore the different rooms that are a part of the spaces and that sort of stuff. Like DLN is using a private instance of Matrix/Element to have our inner network conversations and that sort of stuff. It's very, very useful in that sense, but the community structure was not ideal. And there's a bunch of new features in Spaces that are great that I'm happy to, be able to play with now. It's still in beta again, but I'm already much more pleased with this versus communities. And one of the main reasons is because of the personal spaces. So personal spaces allows you to organize any of your conversations in any way you want to. Now, this could be having a space just for private messages, a space just for specific rooms. So like if you want to have a room that has all the DLN conversations you want, you could do that. Or if you want to have a room that is specific to various different distros, like if you want to have a space that is just for OpenSUSE or a space that's just for Fedora or Ubuntu and that sort of stuff, you could do that with this new Spaces thing. Now, I have been beta testing it since they launched it, and it has been a nice improvement over communities by a lot. And the personal spaces is the critical piece that makes it better. So communities required acceptance by the user to be added to a community. So if all you wanted to do was use it to organize your conversations, you would have to get permission from each person you put in the community. This was such a headache because, I very quickly abandoned attempting organizing it that way because the community system in the Element client was frustrating, as you can imagine. So personal spaces means I can now organize it however I want without any needless invitation barrier in the way. It kind of acts like creating folders for your conversations and folders for your other rooms and that sort of stuff. But it's not just like in a folder structure where you specifically put it in this one thing. You can have the same room or the same conversation in multiple spaces, kind of like a tagging system, or you could say the folder/tag combination, whatever. It's really good. I'm really happy to see Spaces being deployed on Element. So how do you enable Spaces? Well, on the desktop, you go to the section on the far left sidebar, and there is a icon button, and this will essentially activate the Spaces panel. Now, it's already technically there, but you have to click that icon to then agree to be a part of the beta, and then the full support comes. And if you have Android, it's already enabled by default. Just need to update your Element Android app. And if you have iOS, well, it doesn't have spaces yet, so you'll have to wait. But you can still use it on the desktop, so there's that, I guess. Now, they have a lot of future plans coming that I am also excited about, because one of the things that kind of annoyed me about communities, because I could put people in the community, but I couldn't have them auto-join different rooms. And on a private instance for like company network stuff, I would want it to be easy to get into the rooms. Or like, for example, you would require you to do a bunch of kind of like, moving pieces around in order to make it work. And it was kind of annoying. But this now is going to have auto-joining rooms when joining a space. So this means that members could easily see the various different rooms inside of the spaces and quickly and easily get into them, which is nice. And also user permissions that are from not just on rooms themselves, but also on spaces, which allows admins and moderators of spaces to be able to manage all rooms and easily manage the space in general, like when you remove people from the space and stuff like that. That's much, much nicer than the current thing. So I'm really happy that Element is doing this. And also, they're going to be doing like subspaces, which is essentially nested spaces inside of spaces. And that's something I'm also looking forward to, as well as improving other things. Like there's one cool aspect of the bridge system. So they have space bridges, which is essentially taking from other platforms and then creating spaces based on those platforms. So essentially, you could have kind of no space and no people in the space, but create a bridge between MS Teams, like Microsoft Teams or other platforms, and be able to essentially create workspaces and stuff like that all combined in together and really quickly migrate from one to the other. It's an interesting approach. And I think the bridge system also means that you can have like conversations on both at the same time, but it's kind of iffy on that one, so maybe not. But anyway, I'm looking forward to many of the plans that are on this roadmap. But for now, this is a welcome update. And reminder, DLN has a community/space on matrix/element, So if you want to, join us by going to destinationlinux.network/community. You can get involved there as well as other platforms we're on, because we're on quite a few. And if you want to learn more about this particular topic and the spaces concept itself, links in the show notes. Up next in this show is the latest release of the text editor Sublime Text, or Sublime Text 4. So this has a lot of improvements to the text editor. This is actually my preferred text editor. So if you're wondering why it's on the show, well, one, it runs on Linux, and two, I like using Sublime Text, so I'm talking about it. So Sublime Text 4 has a refreshed UI. It has a new adaptive themes that have been refreshed with like the tab styles and interactive pane dimming, and also the themes and color schemes support auto dark mode switching. So if your system is using a theme that is dark mode, it will adaptively change itself to fit that mode, as well as custom title bars can be modified with this adaptive theme. And also they have a new context-aware autocomplete feature. Now they already had autocomplete inside of Sublime Text, but this new one is much nicer. It allows you to have a drop-down window that gives you different choices that are much cleaner, because it did sort of do that previously, but not as efficient and fast. So this new autocomplete engine has been rewritten to provide smart completions based on existing code in a project. Suggestions are also augmented with info about the kind of stuff, also providing links to definitions of the different syntaxes and different languages. So you can have content that's the context aware gives you autocompletes of stuff that's already in your document, but also it can give you different information about different code languages and that sort of stuff. So that's a very, very fantastic improvement. As well as also they have improved the syntax definitions. So the syntax highlighting engine has been significantly improved with new features like handling non-deterministic grammar, multi-line constructs, lazy embeds, and a lot of other stuff. And also, for those who are wondering why I use Sublime Text, well, I use Sublime Text because it has a lot of cool features, and I might talk about it in the future on its own video because there's a lot of them. But multiple cursors is one of the best things inside of text editing. And it was invented by Sublime, which essentially means that you can hold control and click anywhere you want and start editing all at the same time on those different pieces. It's better to show it than describe it, but anyway. But in addition to that, Sublime Text is very, very fast. It has the ability to load very quickly, almost instantaneously, and it also uses very little resources because it is native software. It's not running through Electron or whatever, and that kind of thing. But in addition to that, Sublime Text said we could make it faster, so they have now made it use GPU acceleration, right? So GPU rendering of an already fast text editor, why not? So they say this results in a fluid UI with all the way up to 8K resolutions while using less power than before. Now, it is disabled by default, but it's really quick. You just change the preferences and you add one line and you can activate it. I'll have that information in the show notes if you want to do that, if you use Sublime. They've also updated the Python API, so the Sublime Text API has been updated to Python 3.8, while also keeps backwards compatibility with packages built for Sublime Text 3, which is very important to note because having the full compatibility with version 3 of Sublime Text is important, so it means that you can just kind of have a drop-in replacement if you are using Sublime Text 3 already, like I did. So when I upgraded, all of my stuff kept working, which is awesome. Now, in addition to this, Sublime Text now has added support for Wayland on Linux, which is great for those who are using Wayland. And another thing that they did that I've actually wanted for a very long time is the ability to use Sublime Text on Linux ARM builds. So using it on a Raspberry Pi or the Pinebook Pro or stuff like that, where I previously had to do, I couldn't use, it was only for 64-bit x86 basically. And now having it on ARM64 opens up a very, very good workflow for me in terms of having a lightweight ARM laptop while still being able to use the text editor that I want to. So there you go. If you'd like to learn more about Sublime Text, feel free to check out the links in the show notes. Also, let me know what your favorite text editor is in the comments. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have opinions on this, and I'm curious what it is. Are there anybody who agree with me that about Sublime Text, or maybe you're a Vim user, or maybe you're a Emacs user, or whatever? Let me know in the comments below. This episode of This Week in Linux is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get started right now with your free account at bitwarden.com/DLN. Bitwarden is a password manager, which is software that allows you to have peace of mind knowing that your online accounts are secure. How does it do that? Well, securing your online accounts is very important, and actually the best security for that is to have a different password for each account on every website that you sign up to. And as a policy, this does make sense, but it also sounds like a nightmare in terms of having to manage all that stuff. And that is where Bitwarden comes in, because they solve it by providing tools to store all of your passwords in a secured vault, auto-generate those passwords for you, and even automatically fill in those passwords on login forms so you don't have to do that. You can access your data across multiple different types of devices as well, like your web browser, your mobile apps, a desktop application, and even on the command line. Bitwarden seals and encrypts your private data as well with end-to-end encryption before it ever leaves your devices, so you know you're the only person who has access to your data. Bitwarden is the password manager that I use and trust because in addition to all of these great features, it's also 100% open source software. That's right, 100% open source, which means the features and security of their infrastructure can be vetted and improved by the community. So be sure to go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started with your free account. And I think you'll want to check out their premium account because, one, it starts at less than $1 per month. That's right, just $10 per year gets you a bunch of great features like 1 gigabyte of encrypted file storage, 2-step login with YubiKey, U2F, Duo, Vault Health Reports, Bitwarden Authenticator for temporary one-time passwords, priority customer service, and so much more. And you can get it all for, like I said, less than $1 per month. You can also get family accounts and also business-based accounts so that you can be able to easily manage other accounts for other people. Like, for example, if you have a bunch of people you want to set up their accounts, you can basically create a family account, which allows you to have easier access to help others set up theirs. And you can also have an enterprise or business account accounts, which lets you, have a lot more control between sharing passwords back and forth between different employees and that sort of stuff. So many great features in Bitwarden. So make the smart move like many from the community have and go to bitwarden.com/DLN. This lets you get peace of mind knowing that your passwords and other sensitive data will be just basically having, you'll know that they're going to be secure because of that local encryption is just a great feature, as well as all the other great features that it has. And you'll also be supporting a company that truly gets open source. And when you get the $10 per year premium account, you'll let them know that you appreciate them supporting open source and supporting This Week in Linux podcast. So go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started. And thanks again to Bitwarden for sponsoring This Week in Linux. Up next in the show, we're going to talk about some hardware news. And first up, Entroware's Proteus Linux laptop. So this has a bunch of different configuration options that you can choose from. And one of the things that I really liked about this is that it has a numpad, which is rare in a laptop, especially with a 15-inch laptop. Most of the time you can see them in a 17-inch laptop because there's so much more room, but they're not very common for the 15-inch. So that's pretty cool to see. So this has a 15.6-inch matte FHD LED screen or 1080p screen. And it has multiple different options for various different things. So starting off with the processors, you can get the i5 1135G7 or the i7 1165G7. And there's got 8 megabytes of cache, up to 4.2 gigahertz boost clock with 4 threads and 4 cores and 8 threads. Or with the i7, you got a 12 megabyte cache up to 4.7 gigahertz boost clock with, again, 4 cores and 8 threads. Another option you can have is the RAM. You can choose that you can have the base model, which comes with 8 gigabytes of DDR4, 2666 megahertz RAM, or configurable up to 64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. And in terms of storage, you get a 250 gigabyte PCIe NVMe SSD with the base config, or you can also go up to 4 terabytes of PCIe NVMe SSD storage. So that's pretty interesting. It has Intel Iris Xe graphics. It has a lot of different ports. Obviously, it has some USB Type-C ports. In fact, one of the USB Type-C ports is a Thunderbolt 4 port, which means you can do a lot of cool stuff with it because Thunderbolt 4 is very powerful in terms of giving you the ability to charge the laptop's battery with it. You can do all sorts of like daisy chaining with the Type-C Thunderbolt stuff. Really cool stuff. It also has a headphone microphone combo jack, so it has a Courage jack, HDMI out, as well as, of course, Ethernet, which all good laptops have some ability to do some level of Ethernet, whether that's through USB Type-C or whether that's through an actual RJ45 Ethernet jack that this has. Hardware internet is very important, at least to me anyway. Obviously, if you're going to be portable, that's not practical, but still, Ethernet's best. Moving on, it also has a micro SD card reader, and it has also a Wi-Fi, of course, Bluetooth, of course, and a 73 watt-hour battery, which is very interesting for this particular model. And it comes in at the price of £819.99 pounds, which is converted to USD as 1160, so 1,160 USD for those who are interested in that. If you want to learn more about this particular laptop, I'll have links in the show notes below to Entroware's product page where you can check it out for yourself in the show notes. Some more hardware news and another laptop, actually. A Tuxedo InfinityBook Pro 14 Linux laptop has been released. So this has the same processor that the Entroware one had, so the Intel i5 1135G7 or the i7 1165G7. They just roll right off the tongue. It also has Intel Iris Xe GPU graphics stuff. It also has the base model of 8 gigabytes of RAM up to 64 gigabytes of RAM. It has actually the 256 gigabyte NVMe base configuration for storage, as well as up to the 4 terabyte option as well. It has some USB Type-C, USB Type-A, HDMI, SD card slot, that sort of stuff. Now, it does have a smaller battery. It has a 53 watt-hour battery, and depending on your configuration, that might matter to you. But it has some interesting stuff that I wanted to talk about with, for example, it has a glass touchpad with integrated mouse buttons, backlit keyboard. Now, it's not RGB backlit, which is slightly disappointing because, as you know, RGB that gives you an extra 5 frames per second in any game you play, based on studies that I've made up, and so there's that. But what's really interesting is that in addition to the other options for the configuration, they also have 2 different display options you can choose from. Now they have they're both 14 inches. They're both IPS and 16:10 ratio. But the first option is a 1920 by 1200. Now this is slightly bigger than a 1080p, but relatively kind of the same. It has 60 hertz display, which is a IPS display. So the horizontal resolution of 2K is actually what they're calling it. They're calling it 2K. And I learned something based on this news, is that the term 2K essentially just means approximately 2,000 pixels horizontally. So that could be 1080p. 1080p is technically, you could call that 2K. However, some companies do and some don't. So I just thought that I learned something this week, because I will no longer use the term 2K, because technically this is 2K, and any 1080p can be argued as being 2K. So now I want to be more specific about what I'm referring to, like 3K or 4K, that sort of stuff. But anyway, another option that is offered on this laptop is a 3K display, and they call it the Omnia display. And it has a non-glare finish, the same as the other one, but instead of 60 hertz, it's 90 hertz. And the 3K has the resolution of 2880 by 1800 with 400 nits. So this is really cool because, I've talked about in previous cases where I've mentioned laptops that I was kind of like wanting to have more high definition laptops displays to be introduced in these Linux computers, and this is one of those having that, so that's cool. Now, if the 53 watt-hour battery is good for you, then you might want to check it out. If you care more about longer battery life, I don't know if the 73 watt-hours from the Entroware is necessarily better, but I would assume because of the larger capacity, but who knows. But this is really nice to see a high-end display in a Linux laptop, so I want all of the companies to start introducing higher quality displays, because I just want that. Now, if you are interested in checking this out, this does come in at a little bit higher price with a 1,249 euro base configuration, or converted to USD is 1520, so 1,520 USD. If you want to check that out, I have links to the Tuxedo InfinityBook Pro 14 in the show notes. Up next in the show, and some more hardware news, we're going to talk about a new satellite service that is called Femtostar. So it's a mobile satellite service working towards creating a satellite constellation for open and private communications around the globe. Now, this is really, really interesting. They say that their vision is one of privacy-respecting and net-neutral mobile satellite service that can be accessed by anyone, anywhere, at any time. So to quote the Femtostar website, they say that many products only promise privacy. Femtostar is different. Privacy and security are verifiably baked into every part of the system, all the way down to the lowest level of details. We couldn't violate your privacy even if we wanted to. And they also, the reason I want to talk about it, because it's also very interesting, is that they're partnering with Pine64. And Pine64 in themselves announced on the blog about partnering with Femtostar. And I looked into a lot more details to see what this is. And it's very cool because Pine64 is creating something called their own kind of communications tool through a more terrestrial structure called the PineDio. And it's using the LoRa network, or LoRa network. And this is really cool because the combination between this and Femtostar means that there could be like a satellite communications with like privacy chats and that sort of stuff. But also, Femtostar is open source. So it's free and open source technology. And this goes for the software and the hardware. And yes, even the satellites themselves. Public access to the source files and source code is available. And based on the partnering with Pine64, Femtostar says, we expect Pine64's experience with manufacturing and distribution of affordable mass market hardware to play a key role in making Femtostar usable to the largest number of people possible. And we look forward to integrating Pine64's terrestrial LoRa network with Femtostar's satellite constellation. So this is very interesting news. If you want to learn more about Femtostar or the partnership with Pine64, I'll have links in the show notes to learn more. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to happen because they still need, there's still like a few more months that they're going to be like rolling out more information about this. But based on what they're saying with the whole experience that Pine64 has with manufacturing and distribution of affordable mass market hardware, I think that there's some exciting stuff coming soon. So, links in the show notes. Up next in the show is the latest release of Wine with Wine 6.9. There's quite a few things that have been done in this. It's not a huge release because they're doing the releases much more often, which is great to see because back in the day it wasn't that fast, and now they're doing it way more often, which is awesome. And they've had a lot of improvements. So, for example, they've made it the WP-CAP library converted to PE. If you want to know where all the information of all these different initialisms mean, I'll have links in the show notes for more details. But this means it has also support for paper forms in the print spooler, and also has more math functions for muscle in the C runtime as various bug fixes. Like, for example, they have fixes in Overwatch and Sims 2 support, as well as like 20 other bug fixes and stuff like that. But the thing I want to talk about is that Wine is making some big improvements that I am really happy to see, and that is PEs being supported and converted to supporting PE, which is required to support API hooking. So custom PE loaders or integrity checking that some applications use requires this kind of support through PE, which is great because, for example, anti-cheat software uses this kind of API hooking. So it's great to see Wine supporting more of this because maybe in the future it will give less reason for the anti-cheat software to pretend that it can't support Linux and Wine and Proton and whatnot. So that's great. So fantastic work on to the Wine team. Keep it up. And if you'd like to learn more, links in the show notes. Up next in the show is Coreboot 4.14 has been released. And since 4.13, there have been a lot of changes. So there's 3,660 new commits by 215 developers on this version of Coreboot. And there's these changes have been all over the place. So there's really no way to particularly describe what exactly happened in categories and whatnot, but they've had improvements to main boards, chipsets, including the work to open source implementations of what has been blobs before, which is fantastic, and also improvements to the overall architecture of Coreboot. For those who are not familiar with Coreboot, formerly known as Linux BIOS, is a software project aimed at replacing proprietary firmware found in most computers with lightweight firmware designed to perform only the minimum number of tasks necessary to load and run a modern 32-bit or 64-bit operating system. Since Coreboot initializes the bare hardware, it must be ported to every chipset and motherboard that supports it. That's why we're talking about improvements to new mainboards and that sort of stuff. So as a result, Coreboot is only available for a limited number of hardware platforms, but it is growing quite a bit. And in this latest release, there's some new main boards to talk about. There's 2 new AMD main boards, 4 Intel ones. The Rock Pro 64 from Pine64 is also supported, and 5 System 76 boards have been added to support for Coreboot, as well as 30 other new boards in this release for 4.14. So this is fantastic. If you'd like to learn more about Coreboot, what it is, and what hardware it supports it, you can check out the links in the show notes below. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. And if you'd like to support the show and the channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via PayPal, Patreon, sponsors, and many more. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. And if you become a patron, you can join me during the live stream in the recording stadium, inside of the skybox in the recording stadium to discuss stuff between topics, and just hang out every week after the show in the patron-only post show. Plus, you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to dealinstore.com. There you can get that awesome shirt, which celebrates the proliferation of Linux because it has Tux blended into the background of the design to convey the message that whether or not you know Linux is there, it probably is. And you can also check out the This Week in Linux shirt, which is also at the Deal in Store, as well as many other things like hoodies, mugs, hats, t-shirts, stickers, aprons. So many more things are coming to the store as well, including a sale, so check out for that. And if you'd like to check out more stuff from Destination Linux Network, you can go to destinationlinux.network and you can find stuff from like more podcasting goodness. We have other shows like GameSphere, Hardware Addict, Pseudo Show, Destination Linux, and so much more. So go to destinationlinux.network to check out all of those great shows, and a couple of those I'm also a co-host of those, so check those out especially. I mean, not biased or anything, but you need to check out another thing. If you would like to contribute to the channel and the show with no cost to you, you can use our affiliate links by going to tuxedo.com/affiliates, where you can find links for Amazon, Humble Bundle, and many more to help out without any additional cost. tuxedo.com/affiliates. And just a reminder, this show is live every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern or 1700 UTC, so join us in the live chat room to discuss all the latest Linux GNews each and every week by going to dealinlive.com. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell with the Destination Linux Network, and as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux, and I'll see you next week for another episode of your weekly source for Linux GNews.